Good to see you all. So today we're going to be talking about the wonderful world of Super Mario World ROM hack music. Today, what we are talking about is making music for ROM hacks, which is typically called porting, which I think the word porting always sort of implies that you are taking something that already exists and making it work on a new platform, which is in fact what we're going to be doing today. Sometimes porting also refers to the act of making original music for Mario World ROM hacks. That's just what it is. So, you will need a text editor. Any text editor will do. I use NeoVim, but it's kind of advanced. Right now, what you're looking at is NeoVim, but you can also use VS Code, TextMate, Notepad, Notepad++. Whatever. You just need to be able to edit plain text. If you want fancy colors, I recommend Vim or NeoVim, and anything that supports TM language. That will include VS Code, TextMate. I want to say Sublime Text supports it. I'm not sure. But I have plugins. Here is a plugin in the VS Code Marketplace for Ramekin. Here's Vim AddmusicK for any Vim. But you don't necessarily need that. That's just a bonus. You will also need a terminal of some kind. Okay. On Windows, PowerShell works just fine. Comes with Windows. I think if you just press Windows key and type PowerShell, it'll open PowerShell. Outside of Windows, I'm using Kitty. That's this app you can see up here. If you look very close, it says Kitty. That's the terminal that I'm running all this in. Within Kitty is running NeoVim. There's also, anything, GNOME terminal should be fine. Terminal.app is fine for Mac. Any terminal will do. You just have to be able to type commands and get. The last thing that you will need is a little bit of musical knowledge. Music is a deep topic. You know what I'm saying? I, in fact, do lessons. So if you want to learn the very basics of musical knowledge, please let me know and we can... But you'll need to know what notes are. You don't need to be able to play an instrument. You don't need to be able to read sheet music, though it might help. You need to know what an octave is. And one of the biggest things that you might need to know is some sort of arranging skill, right? Like, take a song that's very dense and compact it to, say, 6 notes at a time, right? Make musical decisions about what notes go where and things like that. We're not going to be talking about taking a MIDI file and automatically making it into... That's not how this is done. We're talking about making high-quality SMW ports where you control every little detail. That being said, what you don't need is any knowledge about the SNES or Super Mario World or the tooling around Super Mario World. We're going to go over all of that. So, I have uninstalled all of my tools, so I'm going to be starting from the very beginning. The first step is installing the tools. So I'm going to be using my tool. There are a number of different ways to do this, but I'm going to be using mine because I like it and I made it. It's called Ramekin. Head on over to the releases page. Now, if you're on Windows, go for the installer. Bam. Installer.exe. Just download that, double-click it to say you trust it, and you should be all set up. Otherwise, download this. This has statically compiled binaries. Pick the one Windows, Mac, or Linux that you would like. Linux users, you're going to have to put that somewhere on your path. If you use Linux, I expect that you know what your path is. Mac, you can do that as well, but for Mac, there's another option, which is that I have packaged it in Homebrew. So you just add the tap and do a brew install Ramekin, and you should be good to go. And that's what I'm going to do right now because I'm on Mac. So this is my terminal here. I just type brew install Ramekin, and it's going to go through a bunch of garbage. Gonna build it, uses crystal. You don't have to worry about any of that. That's just all automatic. So, while that's going, we're gonna take a closer look at this page. If you scroll down on this page past all of this nonsense up here, you'll find the README. The README, I spent a lot of time on the README. It's got all of the usage of Ramekin, how to set it up, how to configure it, which we're just going to take all the defaults right now. If you already know AddmusicK, there is a quick overview for people who do that already. And basically everything I'm going to go over today is in this document. So if you're like, I don't want to watch a stream, I just want to read, well, it's all here. But if that's a lot and that's overwhelming, we're going to go through this very slowly. So once Ramekin is installed, unless you are a Windows user, you will need to run Ramekin setup. What Ramekin setup is going to do is it's going to compile some of the tools that Ramekin uses behind the scenes. The first of which is called AddmusicK, and it's also going to download a bunch of samples. Okay, so what the heck is AddmusicK? Now, if you have made a ROM hack before, you may know about AddmusicK. AddmusicK is the underlying music system used by the SMW ROM hacking community. This is sort of a replacement or extension or fork of the SMW sound driver, right? The thing that like plays music in the game. It's capable of making SPC files, which are little SNES music files. They're essentially executables for the sound chip. And it's capable of inserting music into a ROM. So, Ramekin uses AddmusicK in the backend, but AddmusicK has a lot of little quirks, and Ramekin kind of papers those over a bit. So now we're installed! Now what the heck do I do with this thing? Okay, so if you just type Ramekin at the terminal, it's going to print a bunch of nonsense. This is the entirety of the usage of Ramekin. If you ever get confused and need to see everything Ramekin can do, Ramekin, just type in Ramekin or Ramekin help or whatever, and it should give you the list of stuff. So, we're going to make our first music file. So here's where you go open your trusty text editor. Okay? So, let's say I want to open, you're going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it testy.rmk. Now, Ramekin files typically end in .rmk for Ramekin, and they have a scary extension, but they're just text files, so just open them with the text editor. That's how I do it in mine, but open your text editor to make a new file. So, we're going to do enter the text $0. What that's going to do is select channel 0. And let's see, what do we want to do? Let's do Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? How does Mary Had a Little Lamb go? Well, it starts on an E. Let's say that's an 8th note. Cool. So in order to input an E that it is an 8th note, I apologize for how simple this is going to be. You put an E and then an 8. There you go. The next note is a D. That's also an 8th note. Next note is a C. Also an 8th note. A D, that's an 8th note. And then 3 E8s. Except for that last one is a quarter note. So if I want a quarter note, I put a 4. So 8 for 8th notes, 4 for quarter notes. You may guess that 2 is for half notes, and 1 is for whole notes. And if you want a 16th note, you bet, you just 16, 32nd notes. I think it goes all the way to 192th notes, which is fun. We've got a little snippet of it in here, and what we're going to do is I'm going to type Ramekin testy.rmk. Now, when you're in the terminal, I highly advise that whenever you're typing in a name of a file, you hit tab. So I'm going to start typing testy, and I'm going to hit tab, and it just finishes it for me. That not only saves me a bunch of typing, but also makes sure that I'm in the right directory. Do that. And you can see it says Q equals quit here. So I'm going to hit Q and then quit. So this is playing in SPCT, which has a bunch of fun controls. You got pause, seek, volume. Okay, now, in terms of organization here, there's a couple of things that make this pretty hard to read, right? You look at this and it's like kind of a soup. You wouldn't look at that and say that's Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? There's a couple things we can do. First of all, we can group things. So you can just input spaces anywhere you want. Ramekin will ignore spaces. So now it's kind of grouped by beat, right? The other thing you can do is you can set a default length. So the L command here takes a length like that. So L8 means that any note that doesn't have a length on it is assumed to be an eighth note. That's a little bit easier to read to my eyes. And that should be exactly the same. So let's finish this out. So we got D, 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 and then E, G, G. Now notice that it's looping, right? I only typed this out once, but it keeps playing it over and over and over again. And that's just because you expect music to loop in a game. That's just what it is. Let's do the same thing again. So I'm just gonna copy pasta here because it just goes da 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 da. Again, except da 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 da. Now, I would like a rest here before it loops. And to do a rest, you're going to use the special note called R. So R4 is a rest for a quarter note. So that's just, don't play anything there. And then it loops. Cool. Simple enough. Now, one of the things that we are very concerned about, to kind of a ridiculous degree on the SNES, is space constraints. So, unlike the SNES ROM or the SNES memory, you know, on the main system, the sound chip is very constrained. It doesn't have a lot of memory. There's a lot of things competing for memory, etc. So, the more you can kind of compress, the more notes you use, right? The more space things are going to take up. So we try to compress things. And the first way we're going to compress things is with a loop. Okay. So you see how we have this ED, CD, EE twice? I literally copy pasted that, right? One of the things you can do is if I surround this by square brackets, that becomes a loop. I could give this a name later, but we'll not worry about that right now. Then I can delete all of this and replace it with star. Now what star is going to do is it's going to look and see what's the most recent square bracket thing. And we're just going to do that again. Romhack music, like a lot of other music, has a lot of repeating elements. You got ostinatos, you got stuff like that. And generally speaking, it is good to sort of embed that knowledge into the program. So if I play this, it should be exactly the same. All right, so the star only does the most recent one, but you can actually call up anything you've ever defined. So if I call this Mary Had a, right? So I'm putting this in parentheses here, right before, with no spaces, the loop definition here. Then I can call it here. Does that make sense? So here I can do arbitrary things in between and it won't mess up. The star is sort of a shorthand for this, right? So I'm defining a loop called Mary Had a that consists of these 6 notes. And then here I'm calling it. Now, defining and calling a loop is not free. So for example, you wouldn't want to do something like this, where you define a loop containing just the note D, and then you repeat it here, right? The reason you wouldn't want to do this is that loops aren't free, right? Defining and calling one is a certain amount of memory. Often it's not enough memory as like a whole passage, but it's definitely more memory than one note. So don't loop single notes, double notes. I think 4 notes is the very minimum that I would use a loop on. But typically speaking, there's other constraints that have me often choosing larger loops, allowing duplication in smaller bits. This loop is almost too small for me to consider looping, depending on what's happening in the rest of the song. If this is the whole song, I would probably loop it, but depending on what's happening in the rest of the song, I might not. So let's talk real quick about instruments. Now, Super Mario World comes with a number of instruments. Ramekin can list them for you. You're going to say Ramekin pack. So pack refers to sample packs, which we'll get into in a minute. But the basic sample pack is the Super Mario World sample pack. Let's scroll up there a little bit. So these numbers on the right, unless you know AddmusicK, don't worry about them. They are a reference to the sort of internal index of each number. But SMW comes with all of these instruments for you to use. You notice the instruments all start with an @ sign, and the SMW instruments all start with SMW. You got SMW flute, SMW electric piano, and probably the best sample in Super Mario World, the distorted guitar. So in order to do that, we're going to switch to SMW dist guitar, and we're going to play it again. Great. If you want to switch instruments in the middle, which you often want to do, you can do that here. So let's take another look at Ramekin pack list SMW. Let's go to the marimba. There we go. We can switch instruments. And one of the things that I want you to notice here is we're doing a loop call, right? And that played on the marimba, right? Despite the fact that when we defined the loop, it was the guitar. Cool. So these loops only really contain only the commands that are inside of the brackets, and they don't keep track of any other context. With one exception, which is the octave. So we'll get to octaves in a second. Let's say I wanted to go at the end. So we're gonna go L16 here, so that our default note length is a 16th note, and we're gonna go C. And now I want to go to the G below. Let me get on screen here. Over here. So far, everything we've done happens in this region. So if I just type G, it'll go up here, right? I want to go down here. So what we do is we use the less than symbol to go down an octave and hit that G, A, B. And then to play that C, we have to go up an octave again. Cool? So that's octaves. Does that make sense? So you use the less than and greater than symbols to go up and down octaves. You can also use the O command. So O4 would go to octave 4, O3 goes to octave 3, etc. To very specifically call out an octave. The octave commands don't exist at runtime, right? They're just for us to input the right notes. At the end of the day, all of these notes become numbers, right? And the octave is sort of embedded in the number choice. But for us, we like to think of notes as having names and being in octaves, so we have these nice little helpers to switch octaves. The last thing I'll go over is ties. So if you want a like a dotted 8th 16th. There's a couple ways to do that. Let's say we want to go, yeah, something like that. You want a dotted 8th 16th pattern. There's a couple ways to do that. You can do 8 dot, literally use the dot to make a dotted 8th, right? And we're gonna go with the upper G here, so I'm not switching octaves. The other thing that you could do is use a tie. So you could do a C8 and then tie into a 16. So if you want a length of note that's a little complicated, that doesn't have a simple name like these, you can always cobble together a bunch of ties to make it happen. Now, let's talk about doing more than one channel, because we want to play more than one note at the same time, right? Let's put a bass line on. Let's put like a funky bass line on here, right? So when we want to go to the next channel, we just type $sign and the number of the channel that we want. You have, technically speaking, 8 channels, 0 through 7, right? There are 8 channels on the SNES sound chip. Now, if you're just making music to listen to share with your friends, all that stuff, go ahead, use all 8 of these channels. Who cares? If you are making music for a Super Mario World ROM hack, be aware that channels 6 and 7 are reserved for sound effects, because sound effects have to play on the same sound chip as the music. These are only used in case of emergency, and the caveat to using these is if a player jumps, then whatever note is playing on here will be cut off, for example, right? And anytime a sound effect plays on one of these channels, it will cut off whatever is there. So this is now one of the biggest limitations in ROM hack music. That's even more limiting than SNES music in general. You only get 6 channels, 0 through 5. Cool. And each channel, as you can see, can only play one note at a time, and that's just how the chip is. But we don't need 2 through 5 yet. We're just adding a little bass line. So we're gonna go something like that. So I'm gonna go L16 mode here because honestly I like L16. I like L16 just in general. It's how my brain works, and if we're doing a funky bass line in 16th that's like on the 16th note grid, it makes sense. So we're gonna go SMW acoustic bass, which is one of my favorite instruments from the SMW set. We're gonna go what did I just play? It was a dotted 8th note followed by another C. Then I'll make a space because it's technically the next beat. A 16th note rest. Now I'm gonna leave off the length because we are in L16 mode. So if I leave off the length, it's a 16th note. We're gonna go to lower G. We're gonna go a B flat. Now, this is our first accidental, right? First note that's not just a plain name. So, for accidentals, you're going to use minus for flat and plus for sharp. Easy enough. We're going to have a B flat here. I'm going to make that a 16th. No, that's nice and staccato. Right? So that's 4 16th notes. That makes a beat. I'm going to put in a space. And then we're going to go back to the upper octave and play a C8, and then our rest for an 8th note. So let's hear that. So a couple of things. One is that's in way too high of an octave for my liking, for a bass. So I'm just going to put an octave down mark here. The other thing that's bugging me, and you probably hear too, is it's looping early. Isn't that annoying? Now, why is it looping early? It's just sort of playing here, and it's looping the whole song right here, right? Instead of, you know, playing out the rest of this. And that's just how AddmusicK works, and SPC format in general. If one of your channels ends early, the whole song will loop. This obviously doesn't count channels that we haven't defined. But once we have some notes in a channel, it's going to be a problem. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a bajillion R1s here. So this is a whole note rest. And now it doesn't really loop. The second thing that's bugging me is I want that bass louder, man. Typically speaking, I'm going to turn stuff down before I turn stuff up. And so now we're going to talk about the volume command. The volume command starts with a V for volume, and it goes from 0 to 255. That's your range. It is more or less a log scale, so, you know, the difference between V200 and V190 is about the same as the difference between V190 and V180, right? It's not exactly a log scale, but it's close enough that you can treat this like you would decibels, right? So we're just going to go I don't know, we'll go 190. Cool. Let's finish out this bass line. We'll hit a G here. Hit it here. No. What we're gonna do is hit the G here, and we're gonna go a little syncopated action here on the lower G. Now, let's just hear how that sounds. Let's see if we can go down another octave. Yeah, that sounds nice. And I'm going to take off the dot here and put a rest there. Just make this a little bit shorter. Now, this all still adds up to 1/4 note. Now, I want to play this twice. So one thing that I could do, if you were paying attention earlier, I could do this and then a star. That's fine. That'll play it twice. Cool. The other thing I can do is put a 2 here. Cool. So anytime a loop is invoked, you can put a number after it to say to invoke it more than once. If I put 4 here, it would just keep going. And now that's the true loop. That's the end of the thing. I put a bunch more rests here, but of course this channel ended, so we looped early, right? Now, if you're just doing this kind of use of a loop, you might consider using what's called a super loop, which just sort of uses 2 square brackets. Super loops are interesting. They're a little bit more limited in some ways than normal loops. They don't work with star. You can't name them. All you can do is repeat them immediately. Cool. They're just a repeat sign in sheet music. But what's cool about super loops is normally you can't put a loop inside of a loop. I can't do this. This would be an error, right? You also can't use star inside of a loop. You also can't call another loop inside of a loop, right? You cannot nest normal loops. However, inside of a super loop, you absolutely can. So I could use a star here. I could define another loop. Put whatever I want. Oops, not star. Put whatever I want in there. Do all sorts of stuff. Similarly, within here, within a normal loop, my cool loop, you can use super loops just fine. Super loops have to have a number on the end of them because they just loop immediately. I cannot then go and use any loop stuff in here because I'm already in a loop. You only get 1 level deep of each. That being said, there's a bit of a harmonic issue here because we're doing... Yeah, so let's write a different thing for here. So we're gonna go lower octave B flat. Let's try that. B flat 8. No, we're gonna do a whole quarter note here. No, it's an A quarter followed by an A flat quarter is what I'm thinking. Let's go B flat dotted 8 here. Then I'm gonna call star. So we do this one again. And then we go... Something simple. Okay. Now, see how I'm using 2 rests here? Just RR. That's 2 16th note rests. Ramekin is smart enough to know that if you do a bunch of rests in a row, that it can, like, combine them into a longer rest. In fact, it's going to combine all of these and all of these into one thing. So, you can just spam R to do a 16th note rest, and that's fine. Okay, so let's add some drums, man. We got a bass line like this. We got to have some drums with it, you know what I'm saying? You may have noticed, no harm if you didn't, but if we said Ramekin pack list SMW to list the Mario World instruments again, you may have noticed that there's SMW drums, SMW power, shaker, hat, kick, all these sort of drum words. There's a snare up here as well. These are drums. Let's start with some very simple drums. I'm gonna grab the kick, SMW kick, right? And I'm gonna do a C4, and I'm gonna break the rule I said earlier and just loop this a bajillion times, okay? Cool. That's already grooving a little bit to my ears, but I'd like a snare on the backbeats. You know what I'm saying? So I'm gonna move the kick declaration inside of the loop. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna add the snare. Yeah? So we're just gonna go kick to snare to kick to snare. Now, as this loops, so let's imagine we just type this out instead of the loop. Oops. You see, we're just switching between the different instruments. So kick to snare to kick to snare to kick to snare. Every time you see this at symbol. Now, what I'm going to do is make this snare a little bit lower. All right, I'm going to play a lower note with it. So we're going to go maybe, and I'm going to go back to the looping syntax. Now, you might be a little concerned because I'm using the lower octave here, especially if you've worked with AddmusicK before. I'm using the go down an octave thing here, and we're just going down an octave forever, and won't we just run off the edge and keep going down an octave and end up in nonsense? So, if you know AddmusicK, one of the things you can do is type --txt, and you can either type a file name, myfile.txt, or the special character dash, and it will output the underlying AddmusicK syntax, which looks fairly similar. There's a couple of other things in here. A couple things you might notice. The loops are numbered instead of named. The @ signs have numbers on them instead of nice names. But another thing you might notice is that every time there's an instrument switch, we insert Ramekin automatically inserts an octave reset. So you don't have to worry about every time you do an instrument switch, you're always by default in octave 4. That's just what it is. There's ways to override that, but that means that we can just do SMW's snare less than to just always be in. So I'd like some hats in here. So instead of this C4 here, I'm gonna do SMW hat, I think we have. Oops, where's the pack? There we go. Yeah, SMW hat is there. And we're going to do some 16th notes to fill in. I'm going to do that again here. Now, for drums, I typically want some dynamics on stuff. Like, I want some of these hats to be louder than others. So, say I want tutata, right? So, maybe I want, like, V100 here for that one. V200 255 for that one, and then V 160 for that one. Now, if I'm going to do this, I need to remember to reset to 255 here and here. And then we're going to copy this there. Now, this is starting to get very complicated. Don't worry, we're gonna simplify this significantly in just a second. But just to show you, we can add some little dynamics in there, right? And that's just using the V command to change the volume of the whole channel at this moment. And the V command takes 0 time, right? It's not like a note that has a time length. So it just happens instantly. And so whatever notes we play after are now going to be at V volume 100. This note is going to be at volume 255, etc. Cool. So the first thing is that now I'm in a pickle, because if I want to do some mixing, like let's say I wanted to turn down the drums in general, I would have to edit every single one of these everywhere, and it's a huge pain in the butt if you've ever made a larger song. So Ramekin has a fun feature where you say V255 here, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to use relative volume. So I can say V plus 0, right? That is going to set back to whatever this number was. Instead of V100, we're going to say V minus... what does it take to get from 255 to 100? That's 155, right? We're going to go V plus 0 here. And 255 to 160, that's 40. That'll be 95 minus 95. Cool. So let's copy this. Now, this is starting to look a little bit more complicated. But keep in mind that now, I'm going to make this V plus 0 as well. This all will be relative to whatever I put in here. So if I now say V180, the relative volumes of the drums are all the same. And I only had to edit this. That's how I sort of separate mixing and, you know, turning the drums up or down versus dynamics, which are sort of like, you know, little volume changes within a phrase. Now, if we look at what this outputs, this is a Ramekin feature. All of this is erased in the back end. So all of this just becomes V180, V25, V180, etc. Am I making sense? And if I put a V255 in there, then we do something like that. Sick. So that's that. Now, of course, this is still kind of... I don't like it that much. It's kind of verbose. It's hard to read what the rhythm is, especially if you have, like, more complicated rhythms in your drums, which often is nice to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to simplify this with some macros. Now, macros are really, really powerful. You start them with a quote, and I'm going to call my macro S. Your macro can be more than one letter. For drums, I tend to use S, right? And this is going to be SMW snare. S is my snare, right? And I'm going to do the down octave thing here as well. Bam. K is my kick, and H is my hat. And then I'm going to define some... let's just start there, actually. Now, anytime I write a capital S after here, it'll be as if I typed this, right? So I can replace that with an H, this with a K, this with an H. Cool, so that's starting to get a little bit more compact and readable. Next, I'm going to factor out these dynamics. So I'm going to do forte is V plus 0. Mezzo is V, let's say, minus 95. And piano is V minus 155. So now I can replace all of this with P, this with F, and this with M for mezzo. And these with an F. This is what my drums actually look like in songs. And I would normally do something like that. Cool. So you can see that this is a forte kick on C, piano hat, a forte hat, a mezzo hat, a forte snare, but it's a little bit lower. It's on G. A piano hat. And then notice for these, we don't put an H in there again because we didn't need to change the instrument. It's already there. So basically everything here defines things that will replace whatever the letter is, right? This doesn't save you any memory. This is all sort of compile time, and this is all going to sound the same. Isn't that cool? And you can make these as long and complicated as you want. You can call previous ones that you've... So if I wanted to put a call to S in here, you can do that as long as it's defined above. You can't do recursion if you're thinking of doing, you know, crimes, because you can only reference stuff that is above where the definition is. And there's also no branching here. It's just flat replacement. That's the funkiest Mary Had a Little Lamb I've ever heard. Stay. Okay, now we're going to talk about some stuff in the preamble. Now, the preamble is just a fancy term for the stuff that goes before the first channel here. This is all, of course, on here. If we search for preamble, here we go. We can define some metadata. So title, game, author, and comment. So you can say title and then put in quotes. This is Mary Had a Little Lamb. Sometimes you have to shorten this because I think it's maximum 32 characters. So if you have to abbreviate, you have to abbreviate. It's just what it is. If it's from a game, you can type the game here. Mary's Revenge. I don't know. Author typically is whoever originally wrote it. Whoever originally wrote the track. Put your name here if it's an original. For example, I often write things like Koji Kondo here if I'm doing a Mario thing, or like recently I did a Banjo-Kazooie one, which is Grant Kirkhope. Right, and I tend to do a little bit of research to make sure I know who originally wrote the track. And then you can do comment, and this is where, if it's a cover, you say ported by Jneen, or your name there. Cool. So those are the 4 pieces of metadata that you're sort of expected to put in. If there are special instructions, you can do readme and type whatever you want in here. What this is going to do is when you export this to a package for Super Mario World Central, it'll include a readme with this text in it. If you're using samples, you're going to define path, but we're not... so technically we're using samples, but we're using samples just from Mario World. So we're not using external samples. There's a couple of fun things here that I'm just going to go through. They're all documented here. Option tempo immunity is a pretty important thing. Normally, when the timer is running low, Mario World will speed up the music, unless you have option tempo immunity here, which will make it just be the same speed the whole time. If you want to hear what it sounds like at higher speeds, you can see there's controls here for speed up and slow down. There's BPM. Now, of course, we were just going at whatever the default BPM is, which I'm not actually sure what it is. BPM, you just enter a BPM after the colon. Pretty straightforward. If you go high enough BPM, what is going to happen is that Ramekin will automatically make it half of the tempo and shorten all of your notes. And this is because there are some instances where if you use too high of a tempo, the sound chip will lag, right? So What that's going to mean is if you have a super high BPM, then suddenly you're not going to be able to use super, super short notes, like 190-second notes. But that's probably fine because you don't want to be doing stuff that small note amount at that tempo anyway, usually. So just to say, like, if I went BPM 200, it would actually put me at BPM 100 and then cut all of my note lengths in half. You can also use the T command here to specify tempo if you're more comfortable with that from AddmusicK, but the BPM command will translate into the T command. There's the W command, which is the global volume. So unlike V here, which only affects the current channel that it's on, W, and you can use W down here as well, but W is going to affect every single channel at the same time. And it's sort of a different volume slider than V. So what you're going to use this W command for is once you put it inside of a ROM hack, you need to balance it with the sound effects, right? Typically, I tend to ask people I'm doing doing ports for to go in and balance it themselves because the balance that you want is sort of determined by whatever the mood that you want is, by whatever the level is, by what kinds of sound effects are happening, etc. But generally speaking, you don't want to be super loud. If you are clipping, use a smaller W number here. Should we talk echo settings? Echo's fun. The SNES sound chip is capable of applying automatic echo to your channels. How do we do it? We say echo /channels, and then a list of the channels that we want echo on. So I'm going to say I want echo on channel 0, which is here our little marimba thing. And I don't really want it on the bass. Let's see how it sounds on the drums. Delay here. I'm going to set to 3. I think this is in tick count. I'm not sure. I'll talk about ticks in a second. Volume, I'm going to say is 20. Now this is a hex number, so you know, you could do FF. It's a hex number from 00 to FF. Or not to FF. I think it only goes to 7F. Because you can also do negative numbers. We'll talk about negative numbers in a second. Feedback. We'll do 4.8. FIR. I'm going to turn on. This is sort of a filter on your echo. And there's some advanced options for using the FIR filter, but not going to cover that here because that's pretty advanced. It sounds like ass. Cool. So let's turn it off on the drums. Now I could set delay much higher. Let's try setting it to 7. Don't do this, by the way. I'm going to show you why in a second. Sounds pretty sick, though. Actually, in this track, as it is, we could probably get away with echo delay 7. Let me tell you why it's a little dicey to do this. So I'm going to type viz, and I'm going to go /temp out.ping. So this is just any file path that you want. So this is going to output a visualization of the memory layout of our, right, and the RAM usage of our track. That makes this out.ping, which we're going to look at over here. Now, this can be a little bit hard to read, but, and I forget exactly the colors here. There's some documentation of that somewhere. Black is free space. We actually are doing fine on space. Blue is samples. So these are the Super Mario World samples that we have loaded. Yellow is, I believe, our track data? Or maybe that's one of these greens in here. And red is sort of, what do you call it? Engine code that we can't really do anything about. Purple over here is the echo buffer. So in order to do the echo, the sound data has to be stored somewhere in a buffer so that it can be played back after the amount of echo delay. And the longer your delay, the more this is going to take up, right? So why you don't usually see people using huge delay values like this? Because it's very expensive in terms of memory. So this is our entire budget for this track. And we want to leave some headroom in case somebody wants to add some global sound effects or global songs, or if we want to use external samples, which I will get to in a minute. So typically speaking, I tend to be happy with a delay of 2 or 3. If I'm making music in Renoise or whatever, and I'm just putting a FLAC file on the internet, I'll do all sorts of fun stuff with delay and make it really long, echoey, whatever. But on SNES music, typically that's very expensive in terms of memory, so it's not really done. Cool. If you use negative numbers for volume or feedback, that invokes SNES Surround. And I'm not a huge expert on what surround means. It just kind of sounds nice. That's a thing. As much as I like the sounds from Mario World, sometimes you need a sitar. I want to find a pack that has a sitar in it. I happen to know one, but we'll pretend we don't. Remember we were doing Ramekin pack list SMW. I'm gonna go list sitar. Sorry, search sitar. Cool. That's gonna output a bunch of stuff. So these are various instruments that have the word sitar in them and what pack they come from. Now these packs are downloaded from SMW Central when you install Ramekin. If you want to re-download them, you say Ramekin pack update. But we found a couple with sitar, and notice that Chrono Trigger has a sitar. There's a Chrono Trigger sound pack, and where that is SMW Central Chrono Trigger. Yeah, there it is. It's called Chrono Trigger. If I want to see all of the things in Chrono Trigger, I would go list, and then I just have to type part of the pack name, so I can say Chrono here. And that's all of the samples in Chrono Trigger. Now notice this syntax, #pack. So up in our preamble, if we want to use one of these, I'm going to say exactly like that, pack Chrono Trigger. And then if I want to use, let's say the sitar, I'm going to say instrument, and we're going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it sitar. And it's going to be sitar.brr. You can actually leave off the BRR as well if you want, but I'm going to leave it there because that's what it says up there. If I say @sitar here, that'll just play the sitar. That's the sitar from Chrono Trigger. See how easy that is? Ah! Now, the sitar has a bit of a long attack, right? It goes blah, like that sort of thing at the beginning is long. So sometimes I want to switch notes here without re-triggering the beginning of the sample. And for that, we're going to use legato. So legato is just you put a tilde in between some notes, and between those notes, the note won't be re-triggered. Hear that? And I actually want to re-trigger on that A. Cool. That's legato. Easy as can be. Just put a tilde in there. This is starting to get into stuff that if you're not using Ramekin, you would have to be using hex commands. So if you want to look under the hood here at what that's doing, it's a bunch of nonsense. It has to use this F401 to toggle legato on and then toggle it off in the middle of the node, and it's a whole pile of nonsense which you don't have to deal with. But anyway, that's how you use samples from SMW Central. Anytime you use an external sample, it takes more audio RAM. So let's add some more. Let's change our kick. I think there was a kick.brr in there. List chrono. You got Yeah, there's a kick.brr. And let's import the snare as well. I think there was a snare in this pack. There's an acoustic snare and a power snare. Let's use the power snare. And then I'm going to go down here, and instead of using SMW snare here, now notice this is another power of using macros for this. I only have to change it in one place. And we'll keep the SMW hat for now. It sounds like ass. Let's not go down the octave here. Yeah, let's use the acoustic snare. The power snare sounds like it's for letting it ring, like a kind of thing. Unlike SMW instruments, declared instruments like this can specify an octave. So this is 05, just like you'd use to switch to octave 5. But what that's going to do here in the instrument declaration is it's going to say anytime you invoke the snare instrument, also set octave 5. Now, that one's going on a little long for my taste. I'd kind of like it to fall off a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to specify an ADSR. Okay. ADSR, you specify the attack, decay, sustain, and release. Okay? So the attack, we're going to say 5, decay 7. Actually, we're going to do 0 attack because we want it to go there immediately. Decay is going to be fairly short. Sustain is going to be 0, and release is going to be 0. That's tighter. You hear that? So what that's going to do is it just sets an ADSR there. Now, we could, instead of doing it here, we could also just put this ADSR command, you know, anywhere down here that we want, and that'll just apply it to the current channel on the current instrument. If you switch instruments, that setting will go away, but that's the other way you can do that. You can change ADSR as you go, and you can do stuff like have a little bit of attack in there. Just a little bit more. Make it a little fuzzy, like I should. Now let's put a little bit of release in there. Now release goes all the way up to 1F. So we'll do 1-0. We want it to sound like that. We add some attack in there. See what I'm getting at? The ADSR. ADSRs are very powerful for, especially if you want to use them on SMW instruments, then I can just put them down here, right? I can just do an ADSR 42710. And we're gonna do this a little bit louder so y'all can hear it. You hear how the start of the marimba is a lot softer than before? You could also do that with SMW disc guitar, which I am going to turn down. That sort of softens the little attack of that SMW disc guitar. Sounds pretty nice. We could do a very long attack here. Use A. This is a hexadecimal number, so. That sounds a little bit weird when you're doing all these short notes, but if you're doing like a big long thing, right? Like you could kind of get that going. Let's go back to the marimba for now, though, and let's go back to our tight snare. I liked it at 0300. That's a nice tight snare. But what I want to show you is if I look at the Viz again, you see the echo is much smaller because I turned down the echo, but this has grown a bit. It hasn't grown that much because I'm not actually using that many samples. But if I keep using more samples from various different packs, and by the way, I could use a different pack here. I just say pack again. And then all of the instruments will look in this pack in this area. But you can see if I keep adding more and more samples, and not all samples are the same size either. If I keep adding more and more samples, I'm gonna start getting up to here, and once you hit here, you gotta cut something. You gotta either reduce the echo, reduce the number of samples you're using, etc. That is a very common thing to run into in larger, more complex ports. Right. That's custom instruments. Now, for this thing that I'm working on right now, I need a sample. Okay, so let's talk about what I'm supposed to be doing today, which is not a Mary Had a Little Lamb port. Killer Instinct Gold Jigos theme. Sounds something like this. Now, one of the things that I immediately notice about this is that it's not gonna sound the same without the huh sound. You know what I'm saying? It needs the huh. It needs that nice like testosterone manly yell. You know what I'm saying? So no one on SMW Central has done Killer Instinct Gold samples. I looked. Believe me. And certainly, even if they did, they may have left out that huh sound, which I would really like to be in it, because without it, it's not Jago's theme from Killer Instinct Gold. You know what I mean? The rest of it I can find. There's Koto in there. There's distorted guitar. There's a million distorted guitars around in various sample packs, and there's also the SMW distorted guitar in the worst case. But I'd really like that sample. So I actually found it. I found somebody had ripped the sound effect from Killer Instinct Gold. I looked through the entire bank of sounds and found the thing. This is just a WAV file that I'm playing in this very silly way that I like to do. But I'm not doing anything complicated here. There you go. It's a little high, but you can see how if it was like tuned down, it would sound like that, right? So I used a tool called BRR Encoder, which you can find on SMW Central. I also packaged it, so if you have the same tap as before, it's not there but you should be able to just brew install it. Oh no, it's BRR Tools or something. Yeah, Jneen/tap/BRR Tools. So if you're on Mac, that's easy enough. Otherwise, you can get it from SMW Central. And I used that to turn that little WAV file into a BRR file. Now look at where I'm putting it, okay? So this is my home directory. So this is going to be users Jneen. If you're on Windows, that's going to be like C users Jneen, like that. And you'll use backslashes for all of this. On Linux, it'll be home/Jneen, whatever. I'm just going to type tilde for that, because that's a little shortcut. There's a folder called .ramekin in there. Cool. You might need to show hidden files to see this. And then you make a directory called custom. And then you make another directory with the name of your pack. And you put the BRR there. And it's as simple as that. So I'm going to make that directory. And there we go. We made a BRR out of it. So now I can say pack Killer Instinct. Right? And the reason it's called Killer Instinct, by the way, is because that's what the name of the directory is. So here's my home folder. There's the .ramekin folder. And in that I have AddmusicK, custom, and packages. So AddmusicK you can ignore. That's just the instance of AddmusicK that is used by Ramekin. And here we have custom, and in custom there's a folder called Killer Instinct, and in there there's the ho2.brr. That's just what I called it. You could call it anything else. So Killer Instinct is the pack that I give Ramekin here. And then I can say instrument, and we're going to call it yell, and that'll be ho.brr. When you define your own instrument, it is probably best to do a tuning, and this will be 4 numbers. The default, I think, is 0400. We're going to go a little lower on that, just to tune it down a bit. And we're going to do an ADSR, and we're going to use ADSR flat. This is a sort of a special ADSR that is just like no attack, sustain forever. Just don't do ADSR, basically. Now, normally you don't have to do this because the packs themselves specify tunings, and Ramekin's smart enough to find them and apply them correctly. But because we made this sample, it's best to just... and if we go to channel 2 and go yell, and then do C1, and then do a bunch of R1s. In fact, I'm going to break my rule and just do that. So that's rest forever, essentially. Just going up, 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 up to grab this. There it is. And we're gonna turn it down a little bit because that was pretty loud. We're gonna do V100 maybe. Cool. And there's that sound in the thing. Cool. That's doing actual custom samples that no one else has, that aren't even on SMW Central. I think for most people, it's best to just stick to, if you're really beginning, just stick to SMW samples. If you want to explore a little bit more, start using stuff from SMW Central. And if you really need a sound that isn't in here, then that's how you do it. And if you read up on how to make a sample pack for SMW Central, you can add a tunings.txt file in there, and it should be picked up just like any other tunings.txt, but that's advanced use. The last thing that I'm going to show you about... Oh, you know what? I can't believe I didn't mention comments. Yeah, so this language has comments. You put a semicolon, and everything else will be ignored. So one of the things that I like to do... 0 is marimba and melody, and this is just notes for myself. 1 is bass, 2 is Jago yell, I guess, and 5 is drums. I could put these here as well. So semicolon to the end of the line is just ignored completely by everything. So this lets you take notes, and when you get to more complicated ports, you will need notes. You will need copious notes. Believe me. Last thing to talk about here is panning. Samples on the SNES are mono, but the playback can be stereo. And you can do that by panning. In Ramekin, you can use Y, C pans to center, R and then a number pans out to the right, L and then a number pans out to the left. The number goes from basically 1 to 10. At 10, it's only going to be on the right channel. And here, that's only going to be on the left channel, etc. And C puts it back in the center. So that's easy enough. So let's add some panning here. So we're going to go reset to center at the beginning. We're going to maybe L2, R2, and L2 there. And then make sure the snare is in the center as well. And now, if you're wearing headphones, you should hear the hi-hats are now panned out. I believe that's all of the intro material that we need to get started with the port for Juz. Now, there are a bunch more features in here that I didn't talk about. One is fades, so you can use a backslash to apply a fade to a volume change. So it'll fade to plus 20, to V plus 20 over the course of a half note. You can use that for panning as well. You can fade the panning back and forth if you like. Pitchbends are with the ampersand. It's going to bend the note before the ampersand until it hits the note after the ampersand. If you want to bend in the middle, like start bending in the middle of a note, you use this pipe operator here. So this will only bend during this 8th note. The slash is fun. Slash allows you to put an intro into your loop. So normally everything loops back to the very beginning every time it gets to the end. With the slash, it loops back to, once it gets to the end, it'll loop back to here. If you need stuff that's not in Ramekin, you can actually use most AddmusicK features if that is your jam. For most things that you want, there's something... Oh, last thing, if you want to export this so that it can be used on SMW Central, you do ramekin testy.rmk, and we'll do package testy. You give it a directory name, and this is now a directory, the testy directory, with a readme, the samples, an SPC, and the AddmusicK compatible TXT file. You zip this up and you send it into SMW Central, and you should be able, and it should be, you know, if you compressed it properly and did all that stuff, this should be good for moderation. You can also just use this and then use this TXT file and this sample directory to put it in your hack, just like you would any other AddmusicK song. One thing is, if you are using custom samples, it's probably good to specify a path. And so this is Mary Had a Little Lamb. SMW Central mods really like to see something super unique here, so typically like game-song or something. If we do that again, it already exists, but we're going to delete it. So now you see that the directory that the samples are in has a more useful name. The mods really like to see that. So the TXT file, this is an AddmusicK compatible TXT. It's got all of the stuff, all the tunings and hex and all of this nonsense in here. And it's got a bunch of comments with the sample sources and stuff. If you want to see the source for this, as well as the generated AddmusicK compatible package, I will link those in the description. Everything else should be linked there as well. So, thanks for listening.